Hello, everyone. Thank you all for your continued interest in the Reimagining Our Future talk series, brought to you by the Office of Student Affairs and Services at the Aga Khan University. We began this series to develop an engaged community around issues of our uncertain futures ahead. We aim to bring a range of diverse stakeholders together, including AKU students, staff, faculty, alumni, volunteers, many of our external colleagues, and of course, experts within a wide variety of fields. My name is Saad Zubair, and I'll be your host today. Co-hosting today's talk is Nadia Rahman, Communications Specialist for our office. Before we begin, I'd just like to take a few moments to go over some basic guidelines for this session. We ask that you please mute your microphone and turn off your video to conserve bandwidth. If you have issues in listening to the audio, please try with headphones. And if your issues persist, then do send a message on the public chat or to either of the hosts. Today's session will consist of a short talk of about 15 to 20 minutes, followed by a moderated Q&A segment for 40 minutes, with a total duration of 1 hour for the session. If you have any questions or comments or issues, please write them in the public Zoom group chat. We recommend sharing questions in the public chat so that others can also see where you are going with this and can gain some inspiration from those questions. Time permitting, I will ask Ms. Middleton questions based on the order in which they were received and their relevance to the topic. Coming to today's talk. Today, we are exploring ideas on culturally intelligent leadership for a post-pandemic era. Our speaker is Ms. Julia Middleton, founder and innovation officer at Common Purpose UK, one of the largest leadership development organizations in the world. Julia is the author of the best-selling book, Beyond Authority, Leadership in a Changing World. Her latest book, Cultural Intelligence, CQ, The Competitive Edge for Leaders Crossing Borders, was published in 2014. Julia defines cultural intelligence as the ability to cross divides and thrive in multiple cultures. Julia and Common Purpose have become friends of AKU in the last year and have collaborated with our colleagues in the Graduate School of Media and Communications, as well as in the Institute for the Study of Muslim Civilizations. Today, Julia will be bringing her wealth of knowledge on cultural intelligence to bear on the issue of leadership in the post-pandemic era. Thank you so much for joining us, Julia.
Very delighted to be with you.
Please take it away, Julia. We are all eager to hear from you.
I can see lots of little round people. Hello, and thank you very much for joining today. It's a bit of a nerve-wracking subject. It's so huge and so terrifying, and I hope that I will live up to it, no pressure. I think the first thing to say is that it's very hard to see beyond this pandemic to a future world just at the moment. There are so many ifs and buts, be that how severe it's going to actually be, its depth, its breadth, its length. And as far as I can see, anybody who tells you that they have any ability or data to see the future based on the severity of this pandemic are either not telling us the truth, or they are not telling themselves the truth. I think that we have to wait and see to see how much collaboration is going to appear as a result of this problem in the world, whether cities and countries will manage to act in any sort of coordinated fashion, or whether they will remain, I suppose, whether they will be divided. I think we don't know where the health and the science worlds, whether they will rise to the challenge or disappear inundated, whether primary and acute are going to be recalibrating, whether testing and vaccine is going to scale up or not speed up or meet the challenges. We have no idea what the economic impacts of what is hit us. We don't know if this is going to be bumpy or catastrophic. We have no real idea of how deep the social cohesion problems are going to be. There's data coming in rapidly of the differences between the developed and the developing worlds. There's an enormous amount of data that says that this is very different experience for people who are wealthy and not wealthy, for men and women, for people of different ethnic origins. And we are getting, as we all know, a great deal of information about the mental health consequences of what is going on. And I think that those are going to be particularly acute in countries like the UK and Pakistan, who on the whole only recognise a health problem if somebody's leg falls off, and not if they get mental health problems. We have no idea what's going to happen to the level of trust in the world, whether governments, with contact tracing, that is going to give governments an insight into our daily lives that we've never given them before. They say that they'll, close down the information after 2 weeks. I don't know that I completely trust that. We don't yet know that whether authoritarian governments will have been more or less successful at faster making decisions around the issues. And we have not yet unpicked what sorts of governments have achieved what. We still don't know much about what the impact will be on the company's reputation, whether their great slideshows on the subject of values actually translate into how they've behaved during this period. My father was used to talk about values being like tea bags. You don't know if a tea bag is any good till it's put in hot water.
Sorry to interrupt, Julia. Some of our participants are saying they're having difficulty hearing you. Could you perhaps move the mic closer to yourself?
I can't be much closer than I am, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you. We'll ask the participants to please use headphones and check your own device volume if you can.
Why don't I put out headphones myself, just in case that helps? In any way?
Yes, I think that's a little better.
That's a little better. And we don't know what impact it's going to be on the trust in leaders, whether our leaders will have been creative and agile, whether they will have worked fast enough. So then whether they'll be capable of accelerating out of what we are currently in. And we also don't know what the impact is going to be on leaders who have not told the truth, and whether, as seems to be clear in some democracies around the world, that leaders continue to discover that if they don't tell the truth, it doesn't do them any harm. So I think that there are so many variables on what we're looking at the moment that it is almost ridiculous to do this speech. However, I would propose that we will see that collaboration has been at the heart of the clever responses to the pandemic. We will see that collaboration is at the heart of it, either because it's the source of the good news or the goods and successful actions, or it's the result. The lack of collaboration will be evidenced. And so we'll see the need for collaboration, because where it hasn't happened, there have been disastrous consequences. So to my mind, collaboration is going to be at the heart of it, and therefore, in my view, cultural intelligence. As children, we were all at school, we were all taught that life was about IQ, and the more clever you were, the more successful you were going to be. That's probably true. It is tremendously important to have good IQ so that you can actually get through the amount of data that is thrown at all of us. However, it's not enough. You then got EQ, emotional intelligence, but to me, emotional intelligence is often, though, referred to people who are spending time with other people who are like them. I'm much more interested in cultural intelligence, the ability to work with people who aren't like you. If your collaboration is merely with people who start nodding before you finished your sentence, I don't think that you get the insights that you need. You have to work with people who are very different from you, who don't agree with you. Because only then do you broaden your radar, do you get other voices. And I think that the overwhelming evidence of this pandemic is that those who heard distant voices, but also had the cultural intelligence to actually listen to them, because there was enough diversity in the room. I was working with a big bank in Chicago in January when somebody in the room said, this may not just be a normal flu, this might actually close major cities. And there was a look of horror across everybody's face that somebody had said something really very inappropriate at the meeting. Fortunately, that person was there, and fortunately there was enough diversity in the room that there were a number of people who said, hang on, let's just hear this person out. The result is that organization has done some very successful actions as a result of that, and were much more prepared to support their own staff and their stakeholders as they proceeded through the last few months. I would suggest that the cultural intelligence is about working with people who aren't like you, because they come from a different part of the world, they believe different things, they are men and women, they are tall and short, they are all kinds of different differences. But I think that there is one particular difference that is going to come to the fore as a result of this pandemic, and that is the difference of age. I think that you're going to see a much, much faster transition of young people through to positions of leadership. Did a study at Compurpose a few months ago of the boards of all the major organizations, global organizations in the world, and found that only 40% of the board members of those organizations were under 40, and 17% of those board members were over 70. I predict that that will change quite dramatically in the next few months and years. I think pandemics are around for some time. You are going to need people who are a much more of a spread of ages, because they're seeing different messages and hearing different things and actually adapting to new situations in very different ways. My generation has always had this horrible expression that we should be harnessing the talent of young people. I don't think we should be harnessing young people's talent, because harnesses are just big pieces of leather to stop people from doing things or to force people to do things. I think we have to de-harness young people. That means that older leaders like me have to learn the cultural intelligence to be able to work with people who are half our ages, and not swing from 1 minute being, oh, I'm the font of all wisdom, I know everything, won't listen to anybody, or in my language, I'm all core. Or they swing at the next moment to be sort of trendy leaders who are really very young, and have forgotten everything that they've learned in their eagerness to be young and trendy, or in my language, all flex. And I think younger leaders all over the world are going to need to be much more able to work with people and influence people who are double their age, and not again swinging themselves to 1 minute rejecting all the past and everybody who's older than them because they're boring or repetitive or whatever. And then also not swing to the other one where you have so much respect for age and the requirement to show respect for age that you never actually say anything yourself at all. So to me, there will be a recalibrating of generations. And certainly I believe that my generation, if you are incapable of inspiring somebody half your age, you really should get out of the way. And if you are a young generation, if you are not capable of influencing somebody who's double your age, you need to start working on your cultural intelligence. I think that countries, governments, companies, individual leaders who have what I would call agile creativity in the future are going to be key. out of all disasters, the real issue is how fast can you accelerate out of them. And I think that leaders who have agile creativity, the ability to move fast and to think fast and deliver fast are crucial. But I don't think that's just in behaviors of leaders. I think it's in the systems that they put around them, how they budget, how they target, how they reward, how they recognize, how they plan. Everything needs to change to be much more agile, creative. So those are the things I predict. The one I would love to see, but I can't predict it, I just don't know if it's going to happen, is I hope that there will be more of a calibration between men and women. In my experience, most disasters, women tend to pull their sleeves up and start putting things back together again, brick by brick, always have. And then when the world gets back to some sort of semblance of normal, women go back to where they used to be. I very, very much hope that women who are much more able and much more instinctively collaborative will not go back into the old ways and will continue to stay and to rebuild even when the momentum gets going. I also predict, and I'm sure all of you predict, that there is one thing that we're all going to miss as a result of this pandemic, and we are going to be slightly blind to the reality that the biggest problem of our age is not a virus or any future viruses, it is actually climate change. And sadly, I think that this pandemic will mean that we have put an enormous amount of resources and money and diverted them towards viruses and may run out of money to deal with some of the climate change issues. My fear is that this pandemic will show that leaders don't have cultural intelligence. They're not very good at working together. And that is going to be a requirement if we deal with climate change. I fear that there will be less trust in governments, in companies, and in leaders. I fear that we still will continue to not listen to science and even to lie about the results of science and not get caught out so doing. And I also fear that rather than seeing the rebirth of nature that we can see in some parts of the world as human activity is reduced during this short period, rather than seeing that as evidence that what man does is not great, I think I can see early evidence of people using it as building an unfounded confidence that nature can adapt whatever we can do to it. And so therefore we can take our eye off the ball of climate change. So to me, in the post-pandemic world, to my generation, bring on your talent fast, step aside to give it voice and cover its back, cover young people's back when they start to use it. To young people, hurry up your leadership journey and avoid that journey making you more and more narrow. The more narrow you are, the less you'll hear the voices and be able to develop the ability to work with people who are different from you. To me, overwhelmingly young and old need to develop cultural intelligence because they must lead diverse teams. Innovation comes from well-led discord, and we need to be better at leading discord. And assess when the time comes the answers to all those uncertainties mentioned at the beginning. Do not spend a great deal of time finding out who to blame. That is less interesting than actually learning something and figuring out how we are better in the future.
Thank you, Julia. With that, we'll move into the question and answer section. Is that fine by you?
Happy. We stuck to 20 minutes, did we?
Yes, exactly 20 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so our first question actually is from Mohammed Bhanji, and he asks a fundamental question about cultural intelligence. Would you consider it to be a component of pluralism, or how do the two relate?
A component of pluralism, and how do the two relate? Wow, I don't. If I were with the person who just asked that question, I'd ask them to explain the question to me. I see. If I'm trying to think what pluralism means. If you mean that we're all thrown together and we're very different, then yes. If you're all very different, you must not assume that you can work cleverly together if you don't have cultural intelligence. I think it is the requirement of pluralism. And I also think that most people in the world soon will be living in cities, which means that the amount of difference that there will be in those cities is crucial. And if you are not a leader with cultural intelligence, you will not be fit for purpose as a leader in those cities in the future.
Right, okay, thank you. One of the other questions actually that we had received in our talk last week as well, and the speaker asked again here, you touched on this. The way that female leaders seem to have responded to this crisis the world over, the approach seems to have been rather different than that of many male leaders. What is your interpretation of this difference in response?
My interpretation of the differences in response is a mixture of head and heart, right? In the heart, of course, I want that to be the truth. I love it to be the truth. I believe it to be the truth. And in my head, I'm also saying there's not quite enough data to really conclude that. I think that's jumping the gun. I can't remember what the population of New Zealand is, but it is relatively small and it is an island. So I think that there could possibly be other factors and not just your gender. Having said that, there are some countries where there are, in my view, some very remarkable leaders, and particularly in Germany, a very remarkable leader. And it is interesting, it has to be said, that you know, if you were in Germany a few months ago, I think people had become used to relatively good leadership and had forgotten what a good leader they have. And they have all been starkly reminded of it. But I think there are other issues in Germany too. You know, the high tax rate in Germany means that they have high investment in healthcare, and they were better prepared to deal with some of these issues than others. But so that's all the rational stuff. The heart says, yes, I hope that that is the case. And let's hope that we're going to see more of a balance of good leadership, whether that's men or women.
Thank you. I think that's that drawing out that nuance is important. Our next question is from Asma Ladak, and she asks, what is the skill set that is required to be more culturally intelligent? And how do you suggest that the youth can become more culturally intelligent?
Thank you for that question. I pondered as to how much I should go into cultural intelligence and how much I should talk about pandemic on this talk. I could bore you to tears on the subject of cultural intelligence, and to me, the ability to know the difference between what I would call your core and your flex. And rather than go through that at huge depth at the moment, there is a TED talk, which I'm sure we could send you the link to, which would give you a sense of that. I think it's a sort of mechanism to try and figure out how to develop cultural intelligence. But generally, it seems to me that people who are culturally intelligent have realized that it is worth listening fiercely to others and understanding other people's cultures. It is worth going out and making the effort to do that, sharply in mind that another culture is not necessarily better or worse than yours, and yours being the benchmark. It's just simply different, and therefore approach them equally. And I think the last thing is that however much you learn about other people's cultures, there is one culture that's more difficult than any other culture in the world, and that is your own culture. And the degree to which your own beliefs, your own culture, your own values, your own behaviors increase your ability to work with other people, or sometimes deliver blind spots, which means that you're not very clever at working with people who are not like you. And just to reinforce it, unless you get good at working with people who are not like you, you will not crack the really miserable, difficult problems of the world. Problems cross boundaries. Leaders have to cross boundaries, and they have to go into places and not seek people's agreement or even seek people's liking of them, merely persuade people to work with each other. So cultural intelligence, how can young people develop it? I think resist the forces of humanity that force you to stick with your own tribe, stick with your own family, only follow people on Twitter that you agree with. Talk to people who give you the huge satisfaction of telling you you're right. Instead of doing that, follow all kinds of people on Twitter that you don't agree with, even if it's just to know what they're saying. Hear what they say and how they say it, what are the words that they're using, so that you begin to understand how to resonate with people who are not like you. Go out there, don't always eat at the same place. Seek out people, try and figure out the differences, and those might be geographical differences, people the other side of the world, or the other side of your street, or the other side of your building. Geographical, generational. Last time I was in Pakistan, I went to a dinner, and I remember sitting down and saying, why are all the people my age at this end of the table? And why are all the people my children's age at the other end of the table? How am I ever going to develop any generational cultural intelligence if you won't even let me sit next to each other, next to somebody who is a different generation from me? So go to the other end of the table, and don't go there because you're pretending you're young. Go there because you're equal and you could learn something. But young people, so resist the temptation of homogeneity. Push out, question, be fascinated. Don't be one of those people who, when you meet them, you're really looking over their shoulder because you're looking for somebody who's more interesting to talk to. Whoever is talking to you, be fascinated, find out what they know, understand it. Do that all the time. It's the mentality of a traveler. Whether you are a physical traveler, you can still, or an emotional traveler. Even in isolation, you can be traveling. It's just you're not traveling physically.
Thank you for that, Julia. Interestingly enough, in your answer just now, you addressed a couple of questions that were about to come up, and our participants have commented that they've gained from that. One piece of that question was about how one should build cultural intelligence when living in a very homogeneous society or in communities that are inclined to isolate themselves culturally and socially. I think you did address that to quite an extent, but I think that one piece of that question is when you're surrounded by people who are perhaps not as willing to flex much or to explore other perspectives, how can one push one's own boundaries and train oneself to break that mold, in a sense?
Well, who am I to comment on that, sitting the other side of the world? I do, though, believe that, you know, sometimes we're even blind to the differences. You think everybody's the same, and actually it's because you haven't taken the time or made the effort, or as my father would have said to me, you know, you have to switch the wireless, shows how old he was. You have to switch the wireless from transmit to receive. And even people who you think, oh, they're the same, they're always the same, they're always like that. Actually, if you take the time, you'll find all kinds of things that are very different, and that you can learn from. So I question that. It's too easy to write everybody off as the same. They very often are not. But I think also, if you live in a society that values homogeneity, I challenge anybody to find any society that does not value homogeneity. This is all relative terms. Sometimes you have to go carefully and slowly, but I think on the whole, you have to have the mentality of the traveler and keep going. You have to defend that curiosity in yourself, because let's face it, the world is changing. And go back to the first question, the world is more pluralist. You know, there is more difference, and the homogeneity that might have served my generation is not going to serve the new generations. When I was a child, I was not brought up British. I was a multitude of different people and places. And I remember people who used to say to me, where do you come from? And I would always say, well, you know, that's quite a difficult question. I'm many different things. And they always thought that I was being irritating and uncooperative. And I always thought the fact that I didn't have a one-word answer was my weakness. But it didn't take me many years to discover the fact that actually the fact that I have no single answer to that question is a huge strength. And it means that you do develop more cultural intelligence and the ability to work with people who aren't like you.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I think next I want to move to a question about something you mentioned earlier, agile creativity. So you talked about this, and what does this actually look like implemented in a system of governance, or in a leader who is trying to do things a little bit differently? Could you provide us with some specific examples or things that you've seen?
Do you know, I about 8 months ago, I thought I became very interested in the expression. You know, everybody has to be agile and everybody has to be creative. I just rather enjoyed putting the two words together. And I remember sitting one day and thinking to myself, I want to go to an organization that is really very agile, creative. Clearly, whether I like it or not, whether I agree with it or not, whether I use its products or not, it's definitely agile creative. So I did a bit of homework and came to the conclusion that the organization I'd like to go and study and have a really good look at was Google. So I spent quite a few weeks at Google, and it fascinated me. You know, I went in thinking agile creativity is a mindset. Yeah. It's a really clear mindset, and you've just got to get people to think. And the more I looked at Google, it's as much a mindset as a process. You know, how they budget every year is very different from how the rest of the world budgets. How they set their targets, how they produce their KPIs, how they do their planning, how they reward people. And actually, I came away from it, absolutely, it wasn't their expression, but I made it up. A hunch fund. I love, and I've been developing a hunch fund with various things that I've been working with, which is they back employees who have an idea that's a hunch. They don't say, what is the data to prove that your hunch is right? They say, don't produce any data. This is Google, the last organization in the world I thought would do that. They don't ask for any data. They say, if you work for Google and you have a hunch, then we'll back it. And then 8 months on, if you want us to continue to back it, then you've got to produce some data. But just everything that they were doing, they were looking through a lens of being agile and creative in their mindset, in their processes, and in their behaviors. And ended up producing a bit of a grid on it, which again, I'm very happy to share, of how they do it. But I think that agile creative is interesting stuff. And to be agile creative, you have to be able to work with people who are not like you. You know, if you go to any Google office, pluralism is alive and well and living at Google.
Thank you. That's
with its problems.
Of course, I'm sure. But that's a really interesting perspective, I think, that of the way that they do things and how it is both process and mindset. So coming from agile creativity, our next question from Khadija, she asks, and I think again, this is something you've touched on, what would be the impact of cultural intelligence on the future of politics?
Well, I mean, the obvious question to that is you should reframe the question. What will be the impact of the absence of it? On the whole, to my mind, most governments follow people, they don't lead them. So I think that society will require more cultural intelligence, and it will follow, governments will follow on slowly. But maybe I should actually define that as democracies. Don't know, I need to think about that a bit more. But I think that the other trend, if I'm jumping around, is that I think that as the world is more run by cities, you will find much more culturally intelligent cities, and possibly governments will go slow, national governments will go slower. I haven't got the data on it, but I remember looking at it. If you took all the heads of state in the world and asked how many languages they speak, it's actually quite a small number of languages. And if you take Angela Merkel out of it, it's an even smaller number, right? If you take the mayors of the big cities of the world, it's a much, much greater number of languages that they speak, because cities of the world tend to work with each other and cooperate with each other in a way that in many ways governments don't. So that's as much as I can say on that subject.
Okay, thank you. The next one, I think, moves from politics to popular culture. Amjad Ali Shah asks, where do you place the notion of popular culture influencing our societies, particularly the youth, while embedding cultural leadership in leadership or in organizations? So I think if I'm to interpret that, how is popular culture influencing the youth, and how can we perhaps relate changes in society with respect to cultural intelligence and popular culture?
I think that there's a real danger that I lack the cultural intelligence to know exactly what you mean by popular culture. And I could be assuming that that you either, if you mean it in a popular culture is not a good idea. I don't know. Can you help me with that question?
So this question was asked by Amjad Ali Shah, and Amjad Ali Shah, would you like to elaborate on what aspects of popular culture you're talking about? So the response is largely music, videos, films, magazines, literature, how the influence of that kind of popular culture, whether it's pop music or the latest films, how that influences the youth's cultural intelligence, and how then that goes on to influence how they lead or how they function within organizations.
I would have thought that it was like most issues, you know, if you read some things, it encourages you to stay within your bubble. And if you read or listen to other things, it tends to take you out of your bubble. I think it is worth, if you are somebody who seeks cultural intelligence, to try and read things that you wouldn't normally read and watch things that you wouldn't normally watch. And I think that that will increase your cultural intelligence. I think that, you know, there's a project that we're doing, and AKU is helping us to do it, called Pakistan 100, to try and challenge young people to try and pin down what their aspirations are for the country in the future and for their own generation. I think generations need to take a certain amount of care to build the social fabric of their generation and the language of their generation, and popular culture will influence that. But if they're careless and don't put the effort into trying to build the relationship across their generation, then other people will define it. So I think it's a mixture of accepting other voices, but also trying to develop your own voice as distinct as a generation.
Right. Thank you. I think that's a very that question itself we could probably spend an hour digging into that. So the next one is again by Asma Ladak, and she's asking, how can institutions or individuals measure cultural intelligence to monitor their progress in this domain? Do institutions like Google use any such metric, or is there something that you have seen to be worthwhile or effective in trying to assess this in a systematic way?
Well, you can get me into trouble in the answer to this one. I remember as part of the Google thing, I then said, how do you measure, you know? And they showed me a questionnaire, and I said, this is never going to get to the heart of a problem. If it is, it's just a lot of nice questions. So we had, that was, I hope, where I paid Google back a little bit in a bit of feedback. I think that, you know, there's a real danger that you ask a lot of sort of happy questions and give yourself a sort of satisfaction level, which isn't particularly helpful. For me, we developed something which is called the Team Inclusivity Index, right? Where you go to your team, of which you are the leader, and you ask them a series of questions about the inclusivity within the team, right? The ability for the team to express difference and to feel that their difference is valued and things like that. And we then work out a team score, not an individual score. And in our experience, once you start doing that, the first thing that happens is that the team score goes dramatically down because people are actually forced to think about the issues. But if by doing the team score, you can get the whole team to have a sense of responsibility for getting the score up, and not just sitting with their arms crossed, expecting the leader to take action, but to actually to recognize that there are some things that the team is doing that are not encouraging difference within it, then I think it begins to go up. So I think that you can do all kinds of different things, but I would suggest that they shouldn't be individual ones, they should be team ones. Most of these are cultural things. And for an individual leader, I would say is the team inclusivity index of your team going up or not, rather than do you think you're good at inclusivity?
Right. Okay, that makes sense. That's I think, an interesting perspective where most of us would tend to want to look at our own selves and see how we are doing on different metrics. But this seems like something that can really only be gauged relationally. So we're coming to the end of our Q&A session. If there are any last questions, please share these in the group chat. You had spoken about young people should hurry up in their leadership journey. And yet we see that for those who are driven and ambitious, oftentimes they are required to be perhaps single-minded or narrow their focus, which may result in a loss of openness and flexibility. How do you suggest that someone, a young person who is ambitious, who wants to speed up in their leadership journey, do so while maintaining that sense of openness and flexibility?
Why don't you answer your question first, and while you're answering it, I'll think of my answer. What do you think?
I think that if for someone to attempt to maintain that sense of openness and flexibility, they would need to avoid the filter bubble. They would need to avoid echo chambers and really, I think, be a little bit ruthless with themselves and exposing themselves to criticism and to other ideas. I think where I am unsure is whatever decision is taken, there will be an opportunity cost. So if one is focusing on moving up a ladder, for example, it may not be the easiest thing to get other people's opinions on board. What is a good balance to focus on your own agenda and your own goals versus bringing other people's perspectives in and maintaining that openness? That's what I would want to know.
I think it's, and the answer is a very simple one, that to my mind, everything about leadership is a balancing act. Yes, it's all about where you put the cursor along a balancing act. Just as you know, most tricky things in life are a balancing act. If you're a mother, should you be deeply loving, or should you be deeply empowering? And if you are one extreme or the other extreme, you're not a very good mother. Somehow you have to keep a balance between those two. Love them too much and they never get out. Empower them too much and you might have empowered them to fail. It's a balancing act between the two. Motherhood, parenting, friendship, everything is about a balancing act. And as a leader, it's the same thing. You know, how much do you know your own mind and how much are you open to others' minds? And so therefore there is no absolute answer to that other than the fact that the slider scale should be moving. If the slider scale is stuck at one end or the other, then I would suggest you've probably got a problem. If it's stuck in the middle, then you've probably got a problem. It should be moving, it should be calibrating. There are different situations where you're doing different things. The only thing I would add, I don't know if it's relevant to the question, but you know, sometimes I remember as a young person, I would say, I've not had any opportunities for leadership. And then if I really look back, I would think that there were some moments when I ducked and I said, oh, I can't do that. Or there'll be people who are better at it than me, or this isn't the right time, or it's too risky. And in my experience, never ever miss an opportunity to do a moment of leadership where there's a chance, you know, get on and do it young, because if you make a mistake and you're young, it's very quick that you forgive yourself. Getting other people's forgiveness is very easy. The trouble of life is usually getting your own forgiveness of yourself. So I think learn your lessons as a leader when you're young, when you can forgive yourself quickly. Because once you get a little bit older, it's much harder to see all the chaos that you've caused around you and get furious and lose your confidence. Get in there early, accept any opportunity for leadership, and open your mind to the fact that you're constantly going to have to be learning and hearing voices. And some of them are things you don't like. And again, let's go back to my father. He always used to say, never be a leader if you want a round of applause, because the chances of you ever getting a round of applause are minimal. Be a leader because you want to produce change, and because if you don't lead other people and don't work with other people, you can only actually do about 18 hours worth of changing the world a day. If you work with other people, then you can actually increase your productivity. So get in there and never let your own humility mean that you refuse an opportunity for leadership.
Great, thank you. Thank you, that was very helpful. And thank you for putting me on the spot as well. I would like to hand over to Dr. Aisha Mia for any questions and comments that she may have. And over to you, Dr. Aisha.
All right, thank you, Saad. And thank you so much, Julia. Lovely, lovely to have you at AKU again. And again, for all of your, insightful observations. So an absolute pleasure, absolute pleasure. So Julia, I'm going to, I think we were having a little bit of an email chat back and forth before this talk in terms of, what would be most helpful. And just from a space of, working with a lot of youth, adolescents, young people, especially in Pakistan, over the past, few months, just the amount of stress that they've had, the uncertainty that they see, this world that they're kind of moving into, that they really don't know about. I find that it's been overwhelming for all of us, I think, in one way or another. But they felt this more. This is not the world that they kind of feel. This is probably the first time that they've seen something so drastically just kind of paralyze the whole world in some ways. So my question to you, really more of a reflection from your space. You've seen a lot, right? So you've had a long journey in this life, and you've worked with youth, you've worked with all kinds of people from all around the world. Can you talk a little bit about yourself? How are you dealing with this? Have you had to reach out for some attributes that had kind of gone dormant, that you kind of felt like I need to bring those out to kind of deal with the uncertainty of what's to come? Or, what you had is, what you've been working with, that's exactly what you've been using. You had programs and you just said, okay, let's flip them to online. Or you had ideas that kind of, couldn't now happen. And, your automatic sense was, let's just think about how we can still manage to, get them out. So was it really 100% of the time turning adversity into opportunity? Or have you had moments where you felt dissed, where you felt kind of disappointed or lost or anxious or stressed? And then what has helped you kind of get back to, what is it that I can do instead of sort of, feeling like this is not going to change?
So first, the question perhaps that you didn't ask that's relevant to the beginning is, there is nothing that stresses me out more than a situation where there's no chaotic change, where everything is settled. And if I were a young person, I would regard the chaos that's going on around us at the moment as tragic and difficult and awful, but it's the moment that I would want to be, because it's at moments like this that you can produce change. As Aisha, as you know, I have a son who runs a hospital in London, and as he says, I've managed to produce change within days that in the past would have taken me 5 to 6 years to push through. This is a moment of chaos. I don't find chaos very frightening. I find it actually quite empowering, even though it's terrifying. So live in exciting times. Believe me, if you want things to calm down, you'll be very sad when they do. That don't misread me. Not saying that the world is a good place at the moment, but
Yeah.
Chaos is an interesting state. Chaos is full of momentum. And if you can turn the momentum to be something good, then that's great. The dark moments for me are, if I'm really honest, the dark moments for me is when I question my own sanity. In the early days, I was hearing so many voices saying how dangerous this was going to be and what the impact was going to be. And I remember saying this to colleagues who just thought I was being ridiculous. And that sense of being, you want to be out, but you don't want to be so far out that nobody ever listens to you. And I remember I have one of my children is shielded, not isolated, but shielded because she's very ill. And I remember saying to my husband, we have an amazing marriage and I absolutely love being with you. But if you underestimate coronavirus and as a result, Katie ends up in hospital, I'll never forgive you. This may be the biggest threat to our marriage that's ever existed. So I think it is that moment where you're an outside voice, but you're terrified that you're such an outside voice that you won't be able to get your message across. So you question your own sanity and you try to figure out how to express what you can see in a way so that other people can hear it. And those were my most miserable times. In the middle of the chaos, for me, that is the moment when leaders have to, make something come out of all of this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Julia. I think that this just a little bit of a message that you just gave to our youth that, don't be afraid of chaos. In fact, it's the last thing that you should be afraid of. You should look forward to it because that, helps you bring out, change, not just in yourself, but your community, your family, and it kind of, has that sort of butterfly effect. I think that it's very important for all the students, who have joined us today. I think that this is really so absolutely important to kind of embracing this because you have no idea what, the kind of things within you that this is going to bring out, things that you never thought possible, and this is the space where you stretch yourself as much as possible to get out of your comfort zone. And so this is your time. When Julia first started the talk, she said, this is the time for youth. We all need to step back. So this really is your time. So I think shaping our future, giving it your sort of shape and form. I think that's what's important. So thank you again, Julia. Wonderful, wonderful having you. We'll keep calling you. So thank you so much. We'll keep calling you. We'll keep having you here. Everybody at AKU and now in Pakistan sort of really now has established this relationship with you. We're also looking forward to Pakistan 100, however that shapes up. Great to have you. You take care.
Thank you very much. Lots of
All
love.
right, bye, everyone. Bye.